Well, as we continue our conversation around content and commerce, this would be episode 3, and I'm joined by Skip Martin, one of the commerce strategists at Perficient. Welcome, Skip.
Good afternoon, Carrie.
So, you and I are going to talk a little bit about as organizations think about maturity as it relates to content and commerce, and a big piece around that being around data. How companies think about data, how they act around about data, and maybe some things they're not thinking about data. And so we're really gonna spend some time focusing on that today. So as we kick that off, let's just talk about a couple of the really key pieces of data that play a role when we talk about content and commerce.
Sure. So one thing I thought we might use today is sort of the crawl, walk, run analogy, and in terms of the maturity of the organization. So we could probably start in the normal place, which would be the crawl phase, and it's surprising the number of organizations today that are still sort of in this crawl phase, right, where they're still trying to figure out what data do I need to have a successful commerce experience, and where am I going to get this data, and how am I going to use it? And so it's not uncommon, and I think for those on that are listening in should not be surprised if they are confronted with this as they start this overall journey. And don't let that overwhelm you. Just kind of start with small chunks and the things that you're going to need. So if you think about two pieces of data, two elements of data that you're going to need to support the experience. One, you're going to have to understand who your customer is. And most organizations are pretty good at thinking about customers. They have their ERP and they have the master data they use to do the transactions. And that's a good starting point for those things. One of the problems they tend to run into is that the data, that's not all the data that they need. They also need information about things like, what's the tax rate for that customer, or what agreements might I have that aren't reflected in the ERP. And that type of data is you're going to have to find it and expose it and learn how to use it to drive that commerce experience.
Yeah. So when we talk about customer information, I think that's a really good point, right? We often see companies have information around the customer spread out in a lot of different places. In many cases, we don't see a master customer ID or a master customer record, which even makes it more challenging as we start thinking about commerce and thinking about that customer 360, right? Not about the tools that support that, but just about the data and the information. And I know, Skip, we talk a lot about that about how customers need to start thinking about that system, that master record, to start tying that information together.
Yeah, and it's not unusual for companies not to have really a method to tie all that together. So, what we usually recommend is bite off what you can, use the data that you have available, start thinking about the bigger picture longer term, but don't get stuck in trying to figure out how you're going to tie data across 10 different systems together, but right. Get the base transactional data to start with. And if you can do that, you'll probably be able to support your base commerce experience.
And some of the things that I really think about in B2B about the customer is really quotes, estimates, special pricing. Sometimes these prices are not in your commerce solution, right? They're in documents. And thinking about some of those how do you start connecting those experiences? How do you make your customer's journey easier than it is in the physical world, right? Where you have to call in or you have to ask for help or you can't self-serve because this information isn't available.
Yeah, it's absolutely a significant challenge. Some of these things are even codified in legal agreements and have to be aligned with those. So, what you're probably going to end up with is a situation where you're going to have to extract that in a raw data form and find ways to, create data sources that you can refer to with other systems. But it's not at all unusual for this stuff to be, it's sort of tribal knowledge, if you will, right? Your CSR who deals with that customer every day knows what the discount is, or they know, how to get the pricing for, item XYZ for that customer, but it's not built into any systems. And you're going to have to, do the hard work to extract that information and put it into some sort of an electronic system that allows your commerce system to access that.
And I know you want to talk about product data.
I do. And the other big bucket of data that you need to think about is really product data. And again, from a crawl perspective, let's just talk about the basic information that you need to transact online. Many customers will start with here's the information that I have in my ERP. And they're really surprised when we tell them that, that data is not sufficient and it's not structured properly to help you, be successful from an e-commerce perspective. Whatever cryptic name has been given to a product that will fit in a 13-character field in your ERP is not going to suffice when you try to sell that product online. Oftentimes there'll be no product descriptions whatsoever that are available, and those will have to be authored from scratch. The idea of taking elements of what a product is and breaking those things into attributes that are useful for an e-commerce system is a new idea for a lot of customers. So while oftentimes they have base data to start with, the data usually needs some kind of manipulation before it's ready to be pushed into an e-commerce system to at even a most elemental level to support an e-commerce experience. As you go through the process of developing that data, start with, it can become overwhelming. So start with fast moving products, identify some key things that you're going to provide, right? You're going to provide a product name that a customer can understand. You're going to provide a reasonable description. You're going to provide the key attributes of that product in a product image. That's probably enough to get you started. And from there, then you can start to think more about how you enhance that product data further to make it more useful and as you advance in your maturity.
Yeah, we often provide direction of what's base, like minimal base information that should be on a site, right? As we think about that. And there's a reason for that, because you want that information, because that's some of the base information that's very valuable and important. And to your point, right? The ERP, when we created our ERPs and we put our descriptions in as an example, we never imagined in a million years that this would ever be public facing. The idea was that information was us. We always had a translator in the middle. To your point, a customer care person, a inside salesperson, a salesperson, whoever that would always be in the middle. And now we're really talking about the fact that we're exposing that information. And then we realize the information we have is not the type of information that customers need, want, or that's even helpful in many, many cases.
Exactly. And in a similar way, a lot of this information will be dispersed across multiple systems, even the base data. And so, you're going to have a bit of an effort that's going to be required to pull that stuff together. And then the other element that you need to think about is, this isn't a one-shot deal. Whatever you do, both from a customer perspective and also from a product perspective, you're building, this is sort of a foundational information, and it's going to be extended. So as you do it, don't think about, okay, I'm going to go get this customer data, or I'm going to go get this product data, and I'm going to go through the pain of putting it together, and I'm done. As we go through further in our conversation this afternoon, we're going to talk about adding adding more to these data sets and whatnot. So along with gathering this base data, you need to start thinking right away about who's going to be responsible for maintaining that information moving forward. What are the processes, and start codifying your processes and put some base systems in place that are going to allow you to manage the information as you move forward.
Right. And I think to your point, don't get overwhelmed. Don't try to do everything. the 80/20 rule works really well, right? 80% of your business comes from those 20% of your products.
Yep.
Those are the products you should start with. And again, the base information. And you may not even have all the base information. Do what you can, and then you evolve over time. And to your point, Skip, we talk a lot about, okay, so this crawl stage, this early stage is we're getting started. But a lot of companies miss this step, right? A lot of companies don't
Yep.
really understand the importance of this information, especially their product information. And they get started and they start doing e-commerce or doing portals, whatever it may be, right? Whether it's behind a login or in front of a login. But what you run into is now all of a sudden everybody sees how bad your information really is. So it's really
Exactly.
important to start thinking about how this really is part of your brand and your reputation, and how people, whoever your customers are going to look at you as you're starting down this path and journey and maturing.
And it's interesting too, even simple things like product images, which we all take for granted. We all go on shop online, we all see the imagery, but it's often very challenging for people who are sort of in the early stages of developing their e-commerce capability to get a product image that's clear, that's representative of what the end customers are really going to get. I'm surprised at the number of our customers that have product imagery that maybe shows a package of 24 items in a box, when what they're really selling is one of the 24 items in a box or some such thing, where what they're effectively doing is confusing the customer by putting in imagery that's not representative of the end product, and effectively creating situations where they're going to drive more people to pick up the phone and call or bounce from the site.
Yeah, I think that's interesting too, because when you look at product images, they don't have to be professional images, right? They don't have to be, but they need to be relevant. They need to be good enough quality that people can understand what they're looking at, right? They need to be sized appropriately. But a picture of a box is not useful, right? Because that's not what people are trying to understand. And here's an interesting thing. There was a company who wanted to see if they could increase the number of screws they sell through imagery, right? Because everybody dismisses those small parts like screws or clips or whatever. And they actually saw a 10% increase in the screws that they put images on over the screws that did not have images on. That's pretty significant lift, right? And that was simply by adding a picture of a screw. That was it. So those images are really, really important.
Exactly.
So let's start thinking about, so we're evolving, we've got that basic information, we've really thought about product data. I like to talk about product data conversion into product content, because content is consumable by people outside of your organization. Not that you're not sharing this information internally as well and driving those experiences internally. But let's talk about, as we start to walk forward, Skip, as we start to get more mature, we're understanding this, we're getting a handle on this. Let's talk a little bit about, where does that start evolving?
Yeah. So go again, kind of looking at the two categories, and now we're walking, right? So you've gotten to the point in the crawl stage where, as a client, you can, you've got your handle around some base data. You're able to aggregate it from some number of sources, and you have some source of truth, if you will, for your customer data and for your product data. You have processes that allow you to manage that information over time and evolve it. So as now you're here and you start to think about, okay, what's next? So at this point, you might start adding in more focus around things like web analytics, or pulling in information that maybe is coming from other sources. Like maybe you have a CRM and you want to be able to bring in, okay, here's some, recent activity that's occurred with that customer. And then providing using that information to kind of inform what it is that you want to put in front of that customer. That would be tied in potentially with additional product information that might include things like how to use a product, or maybe you start using some videos and educational kinds of things, and more rich content. So you've got your base structured data, you've got good descriptions, you've got attributes in place, you've got a good product names. and now you're starting to add put some value added kind of information and wrap it around that product. So when you take these two things and you tie them together, you're saying, okay, I've got a customer. They've been talking to their salesperson about product XYZ. So many systems will provide the ability for you to say, okay, you've come in. Oh, here's products that you viewed previously. That's kind of baked into the e-commerce platform. But in addition to that, you might say, you might pull in that CRM information and say, oh, okay, here's some other products that you've expressed interest in. Maybe, start to think about like an omni-channel kind of an experience where the activities of the salespeople and the activities and the interaction with the website, they start to kind of meld together. And so you start thinking about, okay, I'm going to bring customer data from other places and start to integrate that into the how I think about customer experiences. Or I start to look at things like, well, this customer's in this segment, and other customers are looking at these products, in that segment. So I'm going to show you other customers are interested in those kinds of things that can, help enhance the buying experience, help you create a more fruitful site and a more useful site to that end user.
Right. We also think about the starting of personalization in that stage, right? You're starting to build more information about that customer. You're starting to understand a little bit more about how they interact with you, how they interact with your business. You're starting to collect those analytics and that information that starts giving you the data you need to start making actionable decisions, to start moving forward. And that's just a really important piece of this, is that it's about evolving and maturing and growing and expanding. And I think you said it before, every stage, you're never done, right? You're going to add new products.
Right.
There's going to be requirements or needs that your customers have, right? You're going to learn more about what they're looking for. Things that maybe within your organization are blockers for you to be able to do that. We often see that like your data's not structured correctly today in order for you to be able to do some of the things you want to do. But as you start addressing these things in front of the customer and behind the scenes, the experience starts to continues to grow and expand and get better and better as well.
And the other thing, I think, just to be realistic about this, and again, let's not get overwhelmed or try to put too much, try to advance too far too fast in terms of the way the organization is growing and evolving. It'll be very common, most e-commerce platforms are going to provide the ability for you to do some of this personalization. It's done at this stage, in this walk stage. It's often a manual process where you're segmenting customers, you're sending out and providing messages to segments of customers. Those decisions are made manually based upon information that you're getting from these variety of systems. And that's a huge step forward from an experience which doesn't reflect the customer at all. You may start in that crawl stage where everybody who comes to the site, they all get the screws, right? But in this stage, you might be in a situation where maybe a carpenter's getting screws and a plumber's getting fittings, and based on segmentation, you're creating a more personalized experience. So you've progressed. You're providing more relevant information to that end user, but it's still more kind of more manual in nature at this point.
And if you think about the concept of bringing content and commerce together, right? We're going to talk about this in a future session a lot more detailed, but there's a lot of decisions that get made about how do you use commerce and content together. Who owns what? How are you bringing those experiences together? So in a scenario that Skip's talking about is probably a lot more commerce driven in those product pages, but you could also have a experience led on those pages, depending on how many products you have, how complex your products are, what types of products you have, because some products just don't fit like a typical physical product, or a a add-on or a subscription or a digital product, but there are ways that you can enhance and enrich that still leveraging commerce. So we're going to get into more detail about how do you evolve this from a technology standpoint and a decisions making of the business. But I think to your point, Skip, you can do a lot of this within commerce, and a lot of that data that's coming out on your products and your understanding of your customer is really evolving with you as you're growing and maturing and expanding.
Exactly. Exactly.
So let's say we're growing up, we're getting more digitally mature, we're expanding our business, and we're starting to get into that run stage, right? We've made a lot of progress. At this point, what's going on within the organization? What are we really thinking about?
So now I think at this point, you're really starting to think much more about holistic customer journeys and trying to understand where the customer is in terms of interaction and engagement with your organization. So it could be, I was on a call with a customer recently. They sell electronic devices, right? And they described it as at the beginning, early stages, I'm an electronics engineer, and I need to identify a device that's going to fulfill this thing. And you're very much in a research mode. And based upon how that customer is interacting with you, you can begin to draw conclusions about where they are. Are they actually at a point based on whether it be search terms or the type of activities and how they're interacting with sites and even, off-site. And you can start to understand, they're in a research mode, so I'm going to push content to them that's going to fulfill their needs as they do research. And here you're really transitioning to a great extent. You mentioned earlier about a commerce type experience, which, you might think of, I'm going to a site and I'm just going to buy something today.
Right.
Here, you're thinking more holistically about what that customer needs are and how they're going to progress through that experience engaging with you. So you may start out with, I'm doing research. And you may be at a point where you're refining your research into, maybe they're searching within categories or something. And then, they may then transact, and the follow-on part of it may be, tracking shipping and things like that. Or then even beyond that, it would be, service activities that may be tied together. So now when you get to the run stage as an organization, you're thinking across this journey and what the customer is trying to do today. And how do you get to that? You look at those customer interactions in more detail. And at this point, you're now aggregating up data like your analytics data from website interactions, and you're probably going to be using some sort of a AI type system to help you derive where they are in these in your journey. And then on the content side, you're starting to think more broadly about content, not just about what do I need to do a transaction, but what do I need to even decide if I want to do this transaction, or what's how can I help support this customer downstream once they've made their purchase to retain them as a customer longer term. And in these kinds of situations, there's all kinds of smart tooling that's being developed that'll allow you to discern where people are in the journey and better target the information that you have at your purview to meet the needs of the customer where they are.
Right. And I think a lot about, as we're thinking about this, right, you're probably using a lot more of your product information and your customer information to start saying, well, if you're going to buy this product, you need this product as well. Or I always think about when you buy going to electrical, right? You buy terminal blocks, you need DIN rail, you need end stops, you need jumpers. There's all these other things that go with those products. People don't always know that, right? So here's your opportunity to really make their journey easier because you have all this information. You understand when they're looking for this, that there's other related products and packages and how you think about this. And then what are the right products that go together, right? Because especially in the B2B space, we're really often talking about time is money. I have a job to do, right? I'm not shopping generally, I'm buying or I'm investigating products because I'm working on something new and I need to try something. There's so many different scenarios that we think of that you're trying to solve for as we're really looking at this. So as you get into run, and then we always talk about, this continues, right? You continue to evolve and you continue to evolve. It's always moving forward with using the information you're collecting to be able to drive those experiences and get people to convert, to buy, to engage, to ask for samples, to request quotes if that's what they're looking for, right? Whatever that might be, and continuing to really expand and grow over time.
Exactly. And, it's really about, even thinking about customers. Are you first trying to drive just engagement with that customer?
Right.
Or are you at the point where you've got them engaged and you're trying to drive them into the sales funnel? Or are they a customer they've already purchased from you and now you're in, sort of customer service or retention mode? So there's different ways you may think about it. But at the end of the day, and as you think about our entire conversation around content and commerce, really, we're trying to give you an idea of how you build this capability and how to think about it and how your thinking will evolve over time from where you're first getting started to the point where you're far more sophisticated with, leveraging far more data and being able to create a much more focused user experience. And that just is going to come with time. And, the advice that we would give is don't get frustrated or try to, jump to being able to do an AI-driven experience when you don't have base product data in place. Because if you're, these smart systems can help work through noisy data, and that's part of their great value. But if you have very fundamental information, which is flawed in the first place, even these very smart systems will be compromised, and your ability to provide the right content at the right time to fulfill the needs of your customer will be compromised as well.
Right. I think that's a really good point, Skip, as we kind of start to wrap up here, is that these ancillary systems that you want to invest in, it's so easy for people to get excited about, these exciting things, AI, right? Talking about, machine learning and these recommendation engines, but the all of those tools and solutions really work off of the quality of the information that's available. And when you start with a really good foundation, you get so much more value out of those tools so much faster. And it makes sense to put them in at the right time, right? You don't just go out and buy the Mercedes of these extra tools when you haven't even leveraged what exists within the solutions you have. And that's what really is interesting when you really think about it, is it's so easy to get excited about these big things, and then you miss these foundational things that are so critical to success. And it's not a small company problem. It's a enterprise company problem. It's across every industry we work with, every customer we talk to. This is such a common problem and so often missed in when they're really thinking about their journey, because they get excited about those really futuristic and exciting things that other people are talking about. Personalization is a great example, right? You got to have information to be able to really drive personalization. It's not a magic wand that you wave and then you've got great personalization.
Exactly. So I think that, at a high level, we kind of walk through the journey that many organizations will take. Of course, there's a lot of nuance, and everybody's journey is different. But what I think we kind of wanted to convey today was just, start with the basics and add sophistication, manage those things that you need to manage, put good foundational blocks in place, and then, that'll support your initiatives as you become more sophisticated moving forward.